Alright, so I just divided 3.25 into 2, and I got 1.625 or somewhere right in there. So I'm just using my calipers again, setting this point as close as I can to the center of the pilot bit, and I'm kind of placing it right on the outside tooth of that. That's going to be my starting point. Now it's better to do smaller than larger, so I might tap that edge in just a little bit, and then again I'm just going to drop it down and create a scratch on here. So I'm going to go ahead and start from here, and I'm going to go back and reset this caliper to the opening of my router base, and I'm going to measure it as soon as I... Alright, so here's how to make the jig to do this. Reason being, since obviously we're going for accuracy here, I would normally just go ahead and drill right there in the middle, freehanding it, but because this is going to be on a CNC machine, it will take that extra time to set up a easy jig. So I just got a piece of 1/4 inch plywood, nothing special, and some scrap wood. I know that this is 90 degrees, so I'll just go ahead and use this line right here, right on the edge, drop a little glue, or you could use a brad nail or whatever, and sink this one piece. I could line it up on this edge and know that I'm still at 90, but I'll go ahead and just use a square and glue down another piece. That way, no matter where I am on this board, it'll be fine. Now what I'm not going to do is glue these two pieces touching each other perfectly. I want to leave a little bit of a gap in there in case there's any sawdust or something else, so it doesn't throw it off. Just leave yourself a way out. So the only other thing besides that right now is I went ahead and you can see that I marked a check on both of these. We want to make sure that when we're putting these in here, we got them in the same location, and when we're assembling it, we have those in the same location. That way, if there's any error or we're not exactly center or whatever, both pieces are exactly alike. So as you can see, I've got my jig clamped in place, and I went ahead and used my center of the X to mark where the center of the drill bit will hit. Now, I've done it as close as I can. It may be off a little from true center, but it doesn't matter because both are going to be the same. So I'm going to locate my check box in the left-hand corner on both of these pieces. So even if there's any bit of difference off of this true center, it doesn't matter. They're both the same. Now the smart thing here is, before you go ahead and cut one of these pieces, double check it on a piece of scrap first. So I'm going to check it again before I cut the stock that I want to use for this. Don't get your hand anywhere near this. So just give it nice, slow pressure. There you go. Nice clean cut. So here's what we just cut on there. She cuts quite quick, huh? Probably a lot faster than what the CNC is going to be able to do. So putting it down on the router, and what I'm actually going to do is I'm just going to go ahead and finish. I'll just cut this out. We're actually using 3/4 inch stuff. This is 1/2 inch, but I'm going to cut this down to close to the size of what I'm looking for, and put a slit in there, a kerf in there, and tie it all together. I want to see how tight it holds, and see if I need to do any further adjustments. So again, this is one of those steps where just pays out to test out stuff before you go ahead and finish it all up. So let me do that real quick and we'll test it. So there we go. And actually I learned two things. One, that little thickness right there really wasn't enough. When I went to the saw, it kind of broke apart on me just from sawing that little kerf in there and coming back and taking it off. So I super glued it together. And mistake number two is I probably should have drilled through there before I put the kerf, because it's going to want to flex when I do that. So that's why you do mock-ups. But nonetheless, this should be good enough. I'll go ahead and put a spacer in here while I drill the hole, and we'll get it on there and see. So I went ahead and drilled first this time, just manually did it, nothing crazy. And for lack of a better screw, that's just a 2-inch drywall screw. Put a kerf on it with the table saw. And when you're putting this on, you want to make sure that you don't tighten it through with the screw first, so it'll make it really hard to get on. So I'm going to put it on first, and then I'll go ahead and hand tighten it down. But this looks like it's going to work really well. So I'm going to go ahead and cut parts right here for real, and start building that back plate to attach it all to. I've got an oversized piece of plywood stock that I've left intentionally long for the time being. I got it butted up right against the two clamps that I'm using on the router, and what I'm going to do is just mark a line off on each one of those and go through and cut a dado. I'm leaving it long so it's easier to work on a table saw and it's not as dangerous. I want to have about a ½ inch clearance down on the bottom so it has a good shelf for the dado to fit in, and the top I'll probably just extend it up another inch or so. It doesn't really matter too much on the top. But one thing I am doing is I'm making sure this is flush up against the top of this. Gravity can take its course and it'll never move even if the clamps slipped out. So that sitting up there is going to make sure the router can't fall at all. And then one not quite on the bottom, just a little bit up from the edge. So that's my orientation, and you can fill it out, but looks like a good setup. So as you can see, the dados have been cut, and I've gone ahead and just press fit the pieces in there. Everything fits nice and tight. Nice thing about this, it's also self-squaring. So I'm going to go ahead and clean this up, go ahead and cut it down to size. Everything's going to be the same width, and I still got to pre-drill the holes for the screws that are going to hold this together, cut the kerfs in to allow the clamps to have some compression on it, and also I need to go ahead and drill out 4 mounting holes for the bolts so I can affix it to the Z-axis. So I'm not going to bore you with all that. I'll just give a quick shot of the final finished piece. Here's the pieces right before I assemble. Went ahead and got it all trimmed down. This is a 2½ inch long screw, the 5/16 inch washer. The part right here where the screw is traveling through is oversized so that the screw will not grab onto that. You only want it to dig into this part, allows that to remain fluid instead of push itself apart. And this is the part that everything's going to get glued and screwed into. I got 4 holes that have been bored down with a Forstner bit and then drilled through to allow these bolts. These are what goes in the 80/20. You see it has a square nut affixed to the top of it that keeps it in place and allows it not to spin. I'm using a washer and another nut, which is going to go on the inside there, using some thread locking compound to keep everything nice and snug. Outside of that, the glue I'm going to be using is quick set. It's just a super glue, and I'm going to come back and then screw in the pieces again from the back side on the 2 dados as well. So I'll get this together and show you that. I was just mocking this up for assembly, and I changed my mind on 2 things. One, I'm not going to use the super glue. I'm going to use Type Bond 3. I definitely want some more open working time than I was going to allow to make sure everything's aligned, and I'm not going to be screwing into the back like I originally planned. Due to the dado there, I don't really have a lot of area to countersink a screw in. This has got to be perfectly flush against the back, so I'll be using staples. I'll just fire a bunch of staples in there. So between the Type Bond and some staples, it's not going anywhere. And the last piece of the puzzle is I'm just going to put on 2 side caps, basically to tie both of these clamps into this piece and keep everything nice and square, add a lot more strength. So I'm going to have one of these on both sides, and this time around I am going to be using this. Lay down a bead and I'll come back and staple it in again. I just want to caution you to one thing: make sure that you are measuring the distance between here and all the way at the top. You want to make sure it's exactly the same so there's no binding. It should be okay with the dado, but that's why I'm building this with the router inside of it, making sure that, you know, if the router is outside of it and you built it, you might not get the router in. So this way I know everything's going to be able to be removed and replaced if needed. So I'll go ahead and get this taken care of, and that's going to wrap this thing up. So here's the finished product. As you can see, I got it mounted with the 4 bolts, and the router just sits right down in there. And comes to a rest, and these plates I put on the side, nothing's higher than the cord, so I can turn it in any direction I want and it'll just pretty much work. And there's what it looks like on the bottom, with just a little bit of clearance, enough to get the wrench and stuff up under there. So there it is, router mount. Took a little over an hour, made with scrap parts, so it'll do until I cut something out of aluminum, maybe on there longer than I think it will be. Looks like it's going to work out pretty good.